Good morning and welcome to a very special podcasting event. The title of today's program is Renaissance Leadership, a conversation with Dr. Madelyn Blair, and it promises to be an in-depth exploration into the many facets that make Madelyn Blair the celebrated personality that she is. A renowned force to be reckoned with, Dr. Blair is a successful business owner, speaker, author, radio host, and resilience coach. Resilience at every level, in her own words. She has been featured all over radio, television, and the shelves of your favorite bookseller. Her latest international bestseller, Unlocked, is also the namesake of her new television show, which is all about opening possibilities and everything that entails. Among her many accolades, Dr. Blair was recently named Renaissance Leader by the Stone Register, which of course is my company, a leading New York marketing, advertising, and legacy management firm. As a rule, we do not hand out awards and recognitions to clients. I can't overstate that, but there is one shining exception, our Renaissance Leader distinction, which was bestowed upon Dr. Madelyn Blair not once but twice, notably 2 out of the 2 years the distinction has existed. Now, I could go on, but that wouldn't be much of a show, so we're going to let Dr. Blair tell her own story in her own words momentarily. And I've been interviewed by Madelyn, and now it's my turn to interview her. In fact, I insisted. So without further ado, I give you the woman of the hour, our Renaissance leader, 2 years running, Dr. Madelyn Blair. How are you today, Dr. Blair?
SW, I am fantastic today. The sun is shining. The air is cool and crisp. What more could one ask for?
Oh, that sounds lovely. We're having the same kind of day here, too, as well. So, we've got a lot of ground to cover today. We're going to touch on some background and history, your work in the field of resilience, of course, what's going on down the road, what's next for you, and also some more cerebral, personal matters exclusive to this podcast. And of course, the best place, as always, to begin is at the beginning. So I want you to take us back in time, Madelyn. How did you become who you are today and do what you do? What was your path?
SW, already I am I am sitting in that past, and I'm going to be a little emotional because this all started with a mother who always said to me, Madelyn, you can do anything you put your mind to. You know, I didn't understand what that meant when I was 3, 5, 10. Right. But over the years, I have discovered it, that when I think in my mind, this is an interesting area to move into, to understand, to learn, to do, to try it out, I just have continued to do that. And the fascinating thing, you asked about my path is quite, I would say, circuitous. You know, sometimes I was doing technology, sometimes I was doing research, sometimes I was doing human resource kinds of things and social studies in the sense of social research. But in that path, it has always brought each item into the moment. So the fact that I studied mathematics in college, I'm still using in every one of the iterations that I've gone through. Yeah. It's amazing. That and my ability to not just talk with people, to actually empathize with them. I've never stopped doing that. It's just been a wonderful path.
That's amazing.
And it started with my mother.
Yeah. So would you say that you were able to combine all of these different skills and areas of interest over time into the sum total where you are today, that very path?
I think if you allow yourself, that's always what happens, because your brain doesn't really forget as long as you give it a chance to tell you what it knows. Yeah. So you do bring all of it. And for example, in the television show that I'm doing now, I've had audience people come to me and say, you know, I listen to your show because you always know what your expert knows. I mean, not at the same level, but you can ask questions that are relevant and you react to them well. So
Right.
I know that I am bringing everything all the time.
That's great. And it's such a great point that I can relate to firsthand, too, having been interviewed by you on your radio show last year, that you do seem to know exactly what to ask each guest, and you know plenty to get by in all of these different industries that other people are in. So that's amazing. So you have, obviously, on that note, a lot of areas of excellence. How does a person develop so many skills?
You know, I've often thought about that. And, you know, for me, it's not just the skills that I'm using right now, which is listening to you, integrating what you're asking, and then responding, but also the fact that I paint and I design things. Right now I'm designing a garden for a friend of mine.
Wow.
And I think it began with the fact that I had very good eye-hand coordination, which meant that I could really actually observe my own ability to observe, so to speak.
Right.
The other thing that I discovered was that I am insatiably curious.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're curious about something, you go and you try it.
Of course.
And so you're not going to learn a skill unless you try it. And that's another one. And I think I have to admit that one of the things that has allowed this to happen is that I have high energy, and that keeps me going.
High energy and confidence, I bet, as well.
The confidence has been building over the years.
Yeah.
And that comes what I talked about at the very beginning, the idea that I could do anything that I put my mind to. When I began to see evidence of that, my confidence went up. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Now, you do so many different things. What is the driver for all this?
Oh, I think it's that curiosity.
Yeah.
I really am just so curious about everything. In nature, in organizations, in the universe, I'm curious, and so it just keeps pulling me on.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, what is it about the environments you've worked in, for example, World Bank, Columbia University, that have helped you make the choices that you did?
That's a wonderful question. I would say, let me begin with the World Bank. That was my first time working in a fully international organization. Mm-hmm. I met with different races, different cultures, different modalities. I mean, it's a marvelous place to work, but it's very challenging for anyone who has grown up in a single culture. So, because you have to absorb all of that and integrate it into what you're doing.
Of course.
So that particular experience was very powerful in terms of forming me. The other aspect there was that I ended up becoming a division chief, and I managed 70 people. It was unheard of for someone to do within 3 years of entering the bank. And when I did that, my group, they were fantastic. I mean, they were wonderful, wonderful people, very skilled, very intelligent. They always met objectives. They always stayed in budget. And they even tested out at the 90th percentile of the attitude survey. So after a while, I began to say, you know, Madelyn, maybe you really are a leader. You know, you have to question yourself about it. And that really springboarded me to the fact that I then started my own company. And that's been, 34 years ago. So that was a really important part of my experience that was foundational to what I do today. I think the other is my experience at Columbia. You mentioned that one as well.
Yeah.
Because the students there are extraordinary, as appropriate for that kind of a university.
Of course.
But what I found there was that I learned that a teacher is not someone who all they do is talk to the students. I learned that a teacher is someone who also listens to the students, draws them out, helps them remember what they already know, helps them integrate what they know so that they come to new ideas. That was a great experience for me, absolutely great. And I'm very grateful to the students as well. We always had a joke that Well, when Dr. Blair asks a question, it's not because she's questioning what you're doing. It's because she just wants more information.
Right, she wants to learn herself.
That's right. That's right. Anyway.
Do you keep in touch with any of those students? Do you check?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. There are several of them all over the world. I mean, there's one in Dubai, and there's one in Italy, and one in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And all over. Yes, I do.
That's good.
They're wonderful people.
That's good. Now, I want to talk about what is often considered the centerpiece of your research, what you're best known for, which is resilience and the study of resilience and so forth. How do you, an expert, arguably the expert in the world on this topic, how do you define resilience and why?
Many people think of resilience as bouncing back, and I think that's a good starting place. But I see it much more I'll call it broadly. Mm-hmm. I was inspired by the words of Viktor Frankl, the famous psychologist.
Yes.
He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And I thought, oh my goodness, when you're hit with the unexpected, you have a moment. It may be short, it may even be long, but it's a moment when you have to decide, am I going to move on? Am I going to get stuck here? Am I going to regress? That's where resilience lies. And to me, resilience is that decision. So all of my work has been focused on how do we help the person prepare themselves for making that decision so they can move on.
Fascinating. Our society has suffered a real unexpected jolt from the pandemic. The impact is still very real. Is society as resilient as it needs to be, in your opinion? How can we make it more so?
As a species, we are resilient. Mainly because we're a curious species as well. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we cover the globe with billions of us.
Yeah.
But your question is an important one because the pandemic really was a shock to people. And you asked if we have enough resilience. And I think the answer is yes. But at what cost? And right now, what I'm seeing in society is that we are still grieving from the losses from this pandemic. I mean, it could have been a loss of a dear family member, or it could have been a loss. I didn't have my graduation, which I had worked so hard for. I was waiting to walk across the stage and get my diploma, and I couldn't do it. Or maybe it was that, hey, I couldn't have my morning breakfast with my dear friends down the end of the street.
Yeah.
Those are things that we lost in the pandemic. I mean, we lost many other things as well, but those are examples of what we lost. And I think we don't necessarily understand that our bodies remember that and has to go through a grieving process. So that's one of the reasons why I do my TV show and why I'm going to build this new program called Unlocking Together, which is helping people not just grieve. I mean, that's just part of it, but to know how to examine themselves so they can see that. I think a second area, and this is really where the point of, is our society resilient enough, is problematic, and that is teenagers. Teenagers are forming. They're still in the formative stages of their life.
Right. So
they may very well not be sufficiently resilient because they haven't had enough experiences to show that they can be resilient. And I think that they are truly suffering. We have the highest suicide rate we've seen ever in teens. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is I'm building a series of shows where people who work with teenagers can talk about what you can do to help them. I've had, I think, one in the past. I have one coming up very shortly with Pamela Torres Davila. She's a psychologist and a director of research at a university, and she works specifically with teens. I have one already scheduled in 2023 for that, so I'm really hoping that one. And even in my own practice, I currently have a young woman who is in her teen years. And what I've discovered for her is that she's facing a difficult decision. And so part of my resilience coaching or mentoring for her is to help her develop her own decision model so she can make the decision to move on.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. So I know that obviously the pandemic was difficult for a lot of today's youth. Do you think that the situation is further exacerbated by just everything that goes on nowadays with just the general divisiveness in the country and so forth?
No question.
Yeah.
Because it becomes emotional when people are divisive.
Yeah.
And emotions get in the way of processing, literally processing issues. So you can't process your grief if you're angry with somebody else.
Yes.
You
Well
have
said.
to kind of break that. Now, I think your question is a good one.
Yeah.
But, the interesting thing is that I think some of the divisiveness is a reflection of our grief. But we don't necessarily see that. When someone loses a spouse, you excuse them for doing some kinds of crazy things because you say, well, it's part of the grieving process. Well, we have to tell ourselves, maybe that's part of the grieving process. Yeah. And that's what comes back to my earlier point. It's a question of at what cost.
Yes, very, very good point. Now, you talk about 3 traits of highly resilient people. Would you talk about those here and tell me why they contribute to resilience?
Oh, I'd love to.
Great.
This is something that I did discover from my research. I had interviewed people literally around the world. And I was actually asking about something else. But within my research findings, I saw a subgroup. And I said, these people are amazing. I mean, among them was a man who had survived a suicide attempt. So I knew he was resilient.
Right.
And others who had made major transitions and pivots in their careers, who had started businesses and lost it and went back again. So I said, these people are incredibly resilient. So what was a characteristic across them all? And I discovered 3 characteristics. You call them traits. It's a good way to say it. One is that they knew who they were. They had a clear sense of who they were, an identity. Yeah. The second was that they had some in-depth knowledge about something. I always tell the story. One man who was a advertising executive said that his specialty and what he knew best was how to build a ukulele. Well, it was something that gives you a sense of rootedness, of confidence in what you know. It also gives you kind of a framework on how you interpret new data. Yeah. The third characteristic is that they were insatiably curious. I mean it. They were just constantly learning, constantly pushing the edges of what they knew. Right. So much so that sometimes, you find them outside of it, looking around saying, oh, this is interesting. Never daunted. But the fascinating thing here, SW, is that when I saw those 3, I was very excited because, number one, anybody can change and develop those 3 qualities. They really can. But then it turned out that when I read the research on resilience, there was a 4th quality. And that quality is that they had some kind of social support around them. Might have been a strong family. It may have been, a group of colleagues, something that gave them social support and validation. So the 3 traits are ones I found. The 4th I discovered afterwards. And that's what curious people are all about. You keep going. You don't stop where you think you're finished. Now, you asked how that relates to resilience. Well, identity, when you have strong identity, you named it earlier, it builds your confidence, and it does. Your confidence goes up, your competence goes up, your creativity goes up, and your resilience goes up. The in-depth knowledge, I think, is part of how you bring in new knowledge, how you can assess possibilities. So remember, you have to make a decision. So you want to have lots of possibilities. I think the insatiable curiosity is simply that you are constantly open-minded. And when you're hit with something unexpected, you say, okay, what can I learn from this as well as what can I do? And certainly the social support. There's a wonderful African word, Ubuntu, which means I am because you are. We are part of a group. And that social support gives us that. And I think that probably lends to our identity as well.
Very interesting. Now, highly resilient people are insatiably curious. I think most people can agree. How do you create space for being curious in such a busy world?
Oh, you ask questions. You look at the world and you ask questions. Now, I personally think that our education system here has a tendency to dampen that curiosity down.
Yeah.
We don't have time for questions right now, or, get ready for the test. I know that children love to ask the question why, and oftentimes we say, oh, please don't ask me why again. Mm-hmm. So we tend to dampen that down. And in companies, even there, when you're adults and you should be ready and comfortable about asking a question, it could be that the culture of the group is that you don't ask questions of this boss because he has the answers or she has the answers or whatever. So what in your personal life, you've got to just begin with looking at the world and saying, oh, that piques my curiosity. Mm. Now, why did Dr. Blair use that word when she was describing things? Why did she say insatiable? Anything that piques your curiosity, recognize it. You may ask the question or not, but the key is to make your mind or help your mind see the world and see what really interests it. Mm. So that's how you build curiosity. And by the way, a lot of times mothers will say to me, well, how can I restore the curiosity in my child? And I say, ask questions of them and then answer every question that they ask you. Even if that's a great question, but can I answer that tomorrow? In other words, it acknowledges that the question is valid, so it gives permission for the child to ask more.
That's very good advice. It really is, because I think there are a lot of parents that I see. As a parent myself, I'm always in contact with other parents through school and whatnot for my son, and there are plenty of parents that I see where these children's questions are not indulged. They're not entertained. It's kind of just like, go do this, do that. I'll talk to you later. Not now. And I think that kids get stifled a lot these days when these curiosities, these interests of theirs should be cultivated. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem nowadays, at least around where I am. So. But fortunately, it's not like that in my own home, or else I'd have a real issue with that. We're very, when it comes to encouraging questioning and knowledge and curiosity and things like that, it's very, very important to us as parents. But I think that when you equip children in that way, they go on to do great things, not just stare at video games all day and then the problems of the day. But another trait is in-depth knowledge. What about personal knowledge and tips for that?
Okay, every one of us is, whether we are conscious of it or not, we're learning all the time. We read the newspaper, we watch the television, we're discovering new facts that are coming in.
Right.
The question is, how do you really nurture that so that you're really gaining not just little pieces of knowledge or facts? It's not really knowledge yet. It's just pieces of information. How do you nurture the person so they take that in and it does become knowledge in their minds, a kind of wisdom? One of the things that I always tell my students is keep reading, because reading is a part of discovering a broader picture, so that you may see a little factoid over here, which is a little piece of information, but how does that relate to the broader scheme of things? For example, you found out that something happened in Dubai, but do you really understand the Middle East? Right. So you want to be reading. But the other piece of it, now see, that's broadening yourself. The other piece of it is, it's important that you take a moment and say, what am I interested in? So that when you are actually seeking out new information, you know why you're seeking it out. Now, in the case of the example from Dubai, you may be just curious about the Middle East and worried about the Middle East. Okay, that's a good reason to learn. It may be you're simply really, really interested in, I'll call it growing terrific tomatoes. Well, it's a specific area. It's a lot of things you can learn about it. But now you know you have a purpose. You want to grow the best tomatoes. So you want to always be aware of the purpose that you're pursuing. So that's how you get in the in-depth portion of it. So it's one of those things that's sort of kind of a paradox. You have to stay broad and you have to be specific.
Okay, very good. Now, how do you create a stronger social network for yourself?
Well, my secret is to talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
I will talk to almost anybody. The other day I was visiting a park for the first time, a beautiful garden that some rich person, bequeathed to the city, and so they now have this lovely park. Yeah. And I sat down and there was a person sitting next to me, and I just turned to them and I began talking with them. And that to me was a way to keep myself open to the possibility of making a new relationship. Now, that person eventually got up and went off and did their own search in the park. So that relationship is probably finished.
Yeah.
But for that moment, there was a relationship. So you want to think about who is it in your world, and who do you have relationships with? And are you honoring them? Are you nurturing them? Do you call them periodically? Do you write to them? Whatever it is, do you text them? Whatever it is that keeps you connected and develops that relationship. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm wondering about a little bit more, though. Because online media is such a big deal these days, mm-hmm. Do you think that social media online, let's just say social networking through social media, mm-hmm. online, do you think that is as useful, as relevant as sitting down on a park bench next to someone and striking up a conversation?
The answer is yes, it can be. I worked with a man in Melbourne, Australia for 4 years. We never met. We did it all online. And 4 years later, we had an opportunity to meet in New York. And it was like meeting a bosom buddy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can. But in that case, we were working on things together. There was a reason for us to connect. Today, I am constantly reaching out to people on LinkedIn. Right. Because, you can see the profile of people and you say, oh, that person looks really interesting. They might be interested in what I'm doing. Yeah. So you reach out, you connect with them. And when I see them say yes, as often as I can, my time is limited, but as often as I can, I ask them, would you like to have a conversation? And so we may have a Zoom call or just a direct phone call. Yeah. So in other words, you're widening the possibilities. But in the end, it does require, in a way, one-on-one communication, whether it's remote or face-to-face.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. Now, why should people read your book, watch your television show, come to your mentoring sessions?
When I started this work specifically in resilience, because I've worked in other areas before, mm-hmm. It was when I realized that in my own life, there were moments when I really had to call upon my own resilience. Right. I mean, it was everything from a fall on a sidewalk where I tripped on the sidewalk and literally gave myself a concussion. Wow. It's funny because I didn't know I had given myself a concussion until after I had taught my class for 4 hours. Yes.
Oh boy.
And I just happened to be on the way home. I had to stop at my doctor's for something else, and she took one look at me and she said, "You have a concussion." And I looked at her and said, "How did you know I fell?" And she said, "I had a bruise on my chin." He said, anybody who has one that bad has a concussion. So wow. She sent me to bed for 4 days. And she said, "You may do nothing except take care of the essentials like eat and sleep and go to the bathroom." That was it. I couldn't watch television. I couldn't read. I couldn't have a conversation with anybody. Mm-hmm. At the end of the 4 days, my brain got okay. So it was from the simple things like that to really complex things, like my daughter had a brain tumor.
Oh,
I mean, those are things that you realize, oh my goodness, life doesn't just go along like a bowl of cherries.
Mm.
And I said, but that's just me. Everybody has those moments in their life. So what can I do to bring something to them? So that's really where I started, was the challenges of my own life and in my career. I won't even talk about some of the challenges of my career. But I knew that there were other people out there. So for me, the book is there for people who like to read. Yeah. That's their primary way of learning. My television show is there because people sometimes like to hear contrasting perspectives and examples from other places. So that television show gives them that opportunity. And of course, my mentoring, whether it's as a small group or individual, there you can come in and say, this is my specific situation. Let's work through that and see how I can, and I say I'm meaning the person who comes to me, how I can work my way through it. And so that's how I see why people should read my book, watch my television show, and sign up for some mentoring.
Yeah, and it's all interconnected as well. It's like the Madelyn Blair ecosystem, kind of.
That's a great way to put it. I like that.
Yeah. So what's on tap for the future? What's on the horizon?
All right. Well, actually, I have several things, as you would have expected.
Of course.
Certainly, the group mentoring program. We're going to be announcing that actually within 3 weeks. Okay. And it's called Unlocking Together. Yep. And it's going to be a small group mentoring where you are with maybe about 12 other people. Mm-hmm. So you always have time in those sessions to ask your questions, listen to the answers to the questions of other people. It's a very powerful learning mechanism. So that's going to be coming up, Unlocking Together. And of course, I'm always creating new recipes, mm-hmm. new designs, yep. new blogs. And as I said, just recently, I'm designing this garden for a friend. I haven't done any landscape gardening for years because my husband and we've been in our house for over 40 years. And our gardens now are absolutely wonderful and they're well developed. And so there's nothing for me to do. So it's so much fun that I now can do it for somebody else. And then I have 3 more books that are in my head, which eventually will come out. One is called Balancing Form with Freedom, which I'm working with a dear old friend, Leslie Diaz. Another is expanding on what it means to manage your personal knowledge. You asked me about that earlier, mm-hmm. but I really want to develop that more so that people can see how you interpret it in today's environment. And I'm going to write a children's story.
Wow.
Yeah. So
it's about time.
I'll be busy for a while.
It makes sense that you should do that. I'm surprised it took this long for that to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
What's the title going to be?
I don't know the title of that one.
Okay.
The title is almost the last thing you do when you write a book.
Okay.
Yeah. But of course, my focus now is on the Unlocking Together program for mentoring.
Right. And you design clothes, and you're a fashionable person too. Tell us a little bit about that. Not many people know. Well, I don't know. Maybe they do, but I certainly didn't until you pointed out that you had put together some specific clothes. But I'd like to learn more.
Well, when I was little, my mother told me that I always thought about what I wore. She said, you always like to wear out dresses. Now, what that meant was that the bottom, the skirt of it was kind of out and frilly.
Oh, okay.
And I think I never lost that interest in my appearance. I had a favorite aunt who said, when I was a teenager, she said, oh, Madelyn should be a fashion designer. And of course, my mother said, no way.
Right.
Because how do you make a living on that?
Right.
The fashion designers who are listening to this are going to go, oh, no. Yeah. But it doesn't matter because now I do design. I do design clothing and even accessories. And some of them I construct myself. Some of them I have other people construct. And I love it. I still love it. I love the fashion industry. I think, well, I studied art for many years when
Yeah.
I was a teenager, and that was mostly painting and sculpture. But now I really feel that my medium is fabric. It's just how I work.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, you always look beautifully presented in all of the different pictures and videos of you out there. You can always tell just to look at you that you're somebody who does value fashion in
Well,
a
thank
very
you.
significant way. Well, you're very welcome. And I'm wondering, what do you feel is your special gift? Something that you tend to every day or wish you could?
When I was applying to graduate school, and this was for my MBA, I was applying to several, but the Wharton School was where I really wanted to go.
Yeah.
And they asked, there's always an essay part of the application.
Right.
And in this particular case, they asked you to talk about the three most important things to you. And I don't remember what the first one was. I don't remember what the last one was, but I remember the second one. And it turns out that years later, I learned that the admissions people always looked at the second one as being the most important. Well, it turned out the second one that I wrote about was beauty. I really am moved by beauty. And I'm not talking about superficial beauty. I'm talking about beauty in many, many ways. In fact, someone asked me one time, how do I define beauty? And I said, beauty is something that opens your heart. And I had never said it before, but as soon as I said it, I went, wow, that's exactly what it does for me. So I can be looking at a landscape and my heart is open, so it's beautiful. I can be looking at a mother taking care of her child and my heart opens. And I say, now that's a beautiful scene. So beauty is very much a part of my life, and I attend to it every day. I put things in our home that open my heart, that look beautiful. I know people who visit us are struck by the fact that the whole ambiance of my home is one of beauty. So, yes.
You've mentioned before that you are known for the way you keep your home amongst friends and family. It is a beautiful home, I'm told. So that's very interesting. And it all ties right back into the whole Renaissance leader spirit about you, that you are able to do all of these different things in a million different areas, it seems, and to do them all equally. They have the saying, jack of all trades, master of none. Well, you're a jack of all trades, master of all trades.
I'll say maybe master of one or two.
Well, now you've said that each of us has a special purpose in our lives. What is yours?
When I was, I think about 13, I decided I wanted to have a collection. Now, normally 13-year-olds collect things like baseball cards or dolls or I don't know what else. But I collected seeds. Now, I grew up on a farm, so I had lots of seeds that I could collect. And the interesting thing is that I learned those seeds so well that I could look at a seed and I could see the full plant. And even to this day, I can recognize many, many plants from their seeds. Now, I tell that story because it turns out I think that's part of the root of what I do today and my purpose. Because especially when I work with young people, they're still seeds. Someone in their teens is still a seed.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a tiny shoot coming out, but there's still a seed. Yeah. But when you can see the full plant, then you can help them see who they really are. Yeah. And I think that's my purpose, and not just young people, but anyone. I can see the seed and I can see the full plant and help you achieve it. And I consider that my purpose. And I think that's why I'm here, period.
And what do you have to say to people, particularly young people, but not exclusively, who may not have found their purpose, or worse, even think that they might not have one at all, and kind of push them in the right direction to find it?
Well,
How would you do
it
that?
depends on their age.
Hmm.
You know, you can't be too harsh with a teenager. Remember, they're still forming. They have not completed their development. Even their physical development is not finished yet.
Yeah.
So you have to be very gentle with them. And in those cases, I just slather them with encouragement.
Yeah.
Because you have to constantly build them up, because the world is so frightening to them. I mean, it is frightening because they haven't lived it yet. I have found I do this automatically. I see some quality in them, and I simply tell them that. So it just helps them be aware of the gifts that they have within themselves. They're going to find their own purpose. I don't think anybody can find your purpose for you, but you can encourage them by highlighting what their real qualities and strengths are.
Very well said. That makes sense. Now, if a leader wants to help his team be more resilient, what does he or she do? And how do you make a team more resilient?
First of all, they have to recognize that their staff are there to do the job. They don't do the job. Their staff does the job. And your job, then, is to create the environment in which your staff can do the best they can do. Yeah. First of all, the leader has to articulate the mission. They have to convey that so that the team knows, oh, that's the direction we're headed in. All right. After that, you want to create opportunities and places where your team can be learning. Because the more they learn, the more confidence they build, the more curious they become. You want to constantly be creating opportunities for them to be curious. So, for example, with a leader, if you want them to be curious, you better answer their questions when they ask them. Right. And answer them authentically, even if it's to say, I cannot share that with you. That's proprietary or whatever. Right. But you acknowledge the question. You don't diminish them. Yeah. I think oftentimes people shut down questions because they think the person has an agenda. Well, of course the person has an agenda. Yeah. But so what if they have an agenda? You're not going to change that agenda. Right. You can answer a question. Yeah. I told you, one of the things I do for students is I tell them, ask questions. Ask me questions because I'm going to ask you questions. Yep. And after they discover that the only reason I ask questions, as I've said, is because I want more information, it takes about 2 weeks, and all of a sudden they realize, oh my goodness, we can ask any question we want. Yeah. And they blossom. They just blossom. So if you can do that in your team, oh my goodness, you will be bowled over by what will come out of your team if you can do that. Let's see, what else? You also need to tell them what they are doing well. It encourages them to do more of the same thing or to build on it. Yeah. So you need to tell them what they're doing well. Okay. It doesn't mean you don't tell them what they do poorly. That's unfair to them to not do that. But you want to tell them what they're doing well. You want to also create an environment where you are listening to them. Sometimes when people ask to learn something, the first thing that comes out of a manager's mouth is to send them to training. And training becomes a first resort when, in fact, it often should be the last resort.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll never forget, one staff member said to me, I'll learn Excel. And I said, oh, okay. And so we found work for her to do that required that she learn Excel in order to do it. Yeah. So she learned Excel. She taught it to herself. Maybe she went to some of her colleagues and asked them, to help her with something. That was okay. It was still part of the work. And so they were legitimate in helping her, and she was legitimate in asking questions, and she became proficient in Excel. It cost me nothing. And she was satisfied. And I can tell you, if you can meet a person's personal needs that way, and it contributes to the work on top of it, it's golden. It's absolutely golden. Right. Let's see if there's anything else. Well, there are a lot of strategies. but I don't want to get into a lot of strategies. If people are curious, they should contact me, and I'm very happy to talk with them about specific strategies, because oftentimes the strategies depend on the situation. You want to encourage them through any means so that they continue to learn, and you never want to shut down their curiosity. Because if you can do that, what you get out of it is not just resilience. You also get productivity. You get innovation. To me, it is a magic formula.
Wow. That's amazing. And I'll say this. In speaking with you today, and of course in knowing you for as many years as I have, just been kind of sitting here thinking about it. And I think that going forward, one of the things that I'm personally going to do is maybe to make more time to stop and smell the roses, as the saying goes, and to do those extra things, some of the things that make you the Renaissance woman that you are, the Renaissance leader, where you're able to do the professional stuff, the writing, the speaking, and so forth, but you're also able to, something as complicated as design clothes, or something as simple as just sit down on the park and strike up a conversation with a total stranger. And I think the latter part of that is the stuff that I have maybe been missing in my life a little bit. And I think it's easy to get away from that when you get too focused on the other half. So thank you for that.
SW, I am so tickled to hear you say that, because you're in the New York area where people are amazing. I mean, you can meet all kinds of people in New York, and they're willing to strike up a conversation. They really are. Okay, in Wall Street, maybe not. They just buzz by. But if they're sitting in a park, you know they have a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the funny thing about New York is that everybody is willing to do that, but we all kind of move to an insular place for some reason. I'm not sure why, but it seems like a lot of New Yorkers are moving into a more private place, yet there are people all around, and they're always willing to speak. So it's like everybody wants to be speaking to each other, but you don't. Maybe it's from just having so many people around all the time, and you kind of become numb to it. I don't know. Or just the pace of life, maybe.
That's right. Well, let me recommend you do the following. Set an intention that you're going to meet a new person in the next week.
Yeah.
Because intentions are so powerful, both on ourselves and on other people.
Right.
So that's my recommendation to you.
I will do it. That sounds good. Well, that about wraps up today's podcast, Renaissance Leadership, a conversation with Dr. Madelyn Blair. And my only regret is that there's not 9 more of these episodes. It's a little bit of a tease, isn't it? It's one of those things like you get hooked on a great show only to find out that it was a miniseries and it's not coming back the next season. There are many, many more ways, though, to take in the content of Madelyn Blair, and if anything, hopefully this serves as a springboard for precisely that. You can go to www.madelynblair.com. And don't forget to check out her Renaissance Leader website. That's www.renaissance-leader.com. Again, that's www.renaissance-leader.com. Many of you are likely already familiar with Dr. Madelyn Blair and her work, but for those of you who aren't, you're going to be met with a veritable treasure trove of information upon arrival at either of Dr. Blair's websites. There's a lot to dig into in the Madelyn Blair ecosystem, and it really is that. You can pick up a copy of her latest bestseller, Unlocked. You can tune into her new TV show of the same name. There's a lot to do, a lot to take in, and you never know. Madelyn Blair just may end up changing your life. Wouldn't be the first time. And I want to end on this note. You quoted Viktor Frankl earlier, and I'm going to hit you back with a Frankl quote of my own that I think is very relevant to you as a person and your mind and your work, and not only what you've achieved, but what you've inspired others to achieve. And this is a favorite of mine. And I quote, "Life can be pulled by goals, just as surely as it can be pushed by drives."
SW, it is such an honor to talk with you, and this award, as you know, has absolutely blown me away. So again, I want to thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. And I thank you for your time as always, Dr. Blair. I hope we can do this again soon.
Indeed.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.